Okay. Hi there, everyone. How's it going? Can you guys all hear me okay? Okay. All right. So today we're going to start talking about some new information, or new concepts and new ideas that will be on that we'll be using for project 3. So I know you guys just turned in project 2. But it's time to start looking ahead and learning new stuff that we'll be using on project 3. So yeah, so make sure you got your sketchbook out and you're taking good notes today, and let me know if any of the concepts that we go over are confusing or you need more explanation on them as we go through the lecture today. So I think I got almost everyone's project 2 graded. Did everyone see the comments on there and get their grade recorded on Canvas okay? Okay, so yeah, remember you guys can always ask me questions about how I came up with the grade, or if you need suggestions on improvement. I'm happy to discuss it in more detail than the comments that can, fit on the Canvas page or whatever. But yeah, I was really happy to see what you guys came up with. There were a lot of really good ones. It is cool to just kind of see you guys start to improve and see how your work develops through the quarter. So yeah, that project 2 is basically just getting you guys used to that process of going from thumbnail to a rough thumbnail sketch to final digital art. So project 3 and project 4, our last 2 projects, will have a similar process to that. So if you felt confident in doing that process, is starting to develop thumbnails and finishing digital art, that's good, because that's what we'll be doing kind of for the rest of the quarter. If any part of that process was tricky, or you feel like you need more practice, or you need help with certain stuff, practice certain parts of it, or just let me know if I can help you figure out any part of that process, because that's basically what we will be doing for the rest of the quarter, starting with thumbnails, finishing with digital art, saving it as a PDF file to turn in, and all that stuff. So yeah, those were looking really good. And yeah, so we'll just kind of keep going. So project 3 will be doing a few weeks. As with the previous one, I suggest looking ahead at that project description. It's all up there on Canvas now. I might make a few small changes to it, but pretty much everything's up there. So I suggest start looking ahead. And after the lecture today, that'll kind of introduce you to the information and the topics that we're going on. But as we develop further in the class, it's all going to build on itself. So project 3, I'm still going to want to see, good clear focal point, use of the rule of thirds or symmetrical, good shape design, good use of value contrast. So I'm going to want to see all that stuff, and then we're adding mood to it, which we will start to talk about today. So any questions in general on the project or anything moving forward in class? All right, so then we'll get started on our lecture. So yeah, there will be a drawing challenge this week. I'll probably have that up either later today or tomorrow, and I'll send you guys a message about that. There will also be some more YouTube tutorials for you to watch, but you guys kind of have the basics of how we're going to use Illustrator down. But I'm just going to be introducing a few more tools to you guys over the next couple weeks that will hopefully make it easier as we work on more complicated projects. So Regan, still having a problem with the PDF. Yeah, Regan, you can email me outside of class of any specific issues, or feel free to stop by lab hours during the week, and I can help do some step-by-step help with you getting some things figured out if need be. Yeah, saving as a PDF, it can be a little tricky. Kind of getting those settings all right to make sure your work looks good before you submit it. There's always a few of those settings. I know you guys have probably figured it out. There's not always, sometimes people's programs are set up differently. So the settings I do in the tutorial might be slightly different than what works best for your computer. So sometimes it's just going through and trying some of those different settings and seeing what works best. A few people also had trouble with the Clippy mask. I know that can be tricky. So I'll try and do a little demo of those Clippy masks again before project 3. Okay. All right, so this will be our topics for today. All right, so our next project is going to be all about mood, okay? So mood, how you present different emotions in artwork. Different emotions, different feelings, different ideas. And there's kind of a formula to be able to, these are kind of the main 8 that we will go over. There's more than this, but we'll kind of start to go over. We'll see how many of these we get through today, but between today and tomorrow, or today and next week, I'll try and get through all of these as well. But we're going to start off by talking about negative space. So this is a very important concept, and it's going to be used to explain a lot of these moods that we got there. So negative space is very important in your artwork. But it's also something that's often overlooked, especially by young artists or people that are still studying art. I know it's something that I still have to actively think about in my artwork in order to be able to utilize that to make a good image or a good composition. So negative space, I think I mentioned it a couple times before. It's basically empty space within a composition. It's also sometimes called white space. You see it called white space a lot in graphic design. So it's basically just a area in your composition that's empty, that doesn't have anything. And I know a lot of us have a tendency to, when we're working on a thumbnail or a composition or a drawing, whatever it may be, we have a tendency to want to fill up the entire composition with stuff, whether it's abstract or it's representational. You want to fill it up, but oftentimes since wanting to fill it up is kind of our natural tendency, you need to fight against that lots of times and find a way to create negative space within a composition. So just leaving a section of that composition completely empty and completely blank is a really good way to create a more interesting composition. It creates contrast between a busy section versus an empty section, and it creates a good balance in your composition. And we'll talk about sometimes we want a lot of negative space and sometimes we want almost no negative space. So let's do a couple other examples really quick. So let's just think of one subject matter. So let's just do Mount Rainier here. So our famous Mount Rainier here in Washington. Here's a good drawing of it, or an okay drawing of it. So you can draw that mountain in a way that has a lot of negative space, medium amount of negative space, or almost no negative space. So let's do it with large negative space. So that means I would come here, I would draw the mountains. We have a very small little mountain right here. I'm going to make this mountain my focal point, so I'm going to make it black so it stands out. But I don't need to necessarily fill all this space up here, okay? That's not going to necessarily make it a better drawing. Having that large negative space is nice oftentimes. It gives the eye an area to rest, and it allows the focal point to stand out more. Like if I came up here and filled this with a bunch of clouds, it'd be kind of hard to find that focal point there. So leaving this as empty can oftentimes be a really nice choice. So let's do medium negative space in this one. So that would be kind of maybe just like a standard view that you would think of drawing the mountain. So this one, this view here, this is about 50-50 now. So we got 50. Let's make this black again. So we're still using value. So now this has about 50-50 positive and negative space. About half of it is positive space down here and empty space up there. So that's a good balance as well. And then if you want small negative space, that would be when you come and start to draw your mountain like this. So now as I draw this, there's only, I'm going to make the background black this time. Only this little bit of negative space right in here. Okay. And sometimes you'll have a composition with no negative space. We'll get into that when we talk about some of the moods later on. But as you can see now, I'm drawing this mountain in 3 different compositions, but the only change I'm thinking about as I'm drawing these is manipulating that negative space and making large negative space or small negative space. And it has a very different feel for the composition, and kind of creates a different effect. But not one of these is better or worse. It kind of depends on the purpose and what you're trying to say about this mountain and what the final version of this composition is going to be, whether it's going to be a poster design, whether it's going to be an oil painting, whether it's going to be a photograph, you know, it might depend. And you're not going to know which one will work better until you sketch it out as a thumbnail. Okay. Any questions about negative space there? Negative space. Make sure you guys write that down and sketch some of these examples. Okay, one other quick note. Put focal point in negative space. So not always, but a good idea lots of times is to put the focal point in negative space. Okay. You know, that's a pretty simple thought process to go through. So let's say we have some trees down here, maybe some mountains, stuff right here. So this is not negative space. We're filling this up with stuff. So let's say our focal point is an airplane. I don't want to put the airplane like down here flying between the mountains. Even if it's a small airplane, it's going to be kind of hard to see. So where do I want to put it? I want to put the airplane or the focal point somewhere in this negative space. Okay. So it just kind of creates an empty area around that focal point. It allows it to stand out and be seen better. You can do the same thing with abstract. If we're just working with a bunch of abstract shapes and lines. So I'm just trying to create some busy areas filled up with different stuff. Again, if I want a shape like this, just coming up with an abstract shape. to be a focal point. I'm not going to put it down here. I'm going to put that right here, and now it will stand out much better. You'll see this a lot in like poster design or book cover design. You're not going to put your title down here if your title is a focal point. You can hardly even read that. You want to put a title when it's a book cover or movie poster up here in the negative space, or like a magazine ad. So that's where it's used a lot in graphic design and poster design and things like that, is balancing that positive and negative space, making sure something stands out clearly. For us, it'll be a focal point shape. In other disciplines, it's, you know, where to put the title on a book cover, where to put buttons on a website. You want that in a negative space and things like that. Okay, any questions on negative space, how to use it? Okay, so we'll start talking about this a lot more as we go over some of these moods. So have you guys ever heard of creating moods in artwork? Has anyone ever done that or heard about that? Vaguely, okay. So yeah, moods are basically something, a very valuable tool, a very powerful tool we have as artists, and that's being able to kind of manipulate the emotions of someone looking at your artwork. So that's a big thing you want to communicate when someone looks at a piece that you've created. You want to create this sort of feeling inside them, or make them relate to other emotions that they've gone through themselves. And there are some basic kind of formulas that you can use in order to get that. One of the biggest emotional indicators in artwork is color. Okay, so unfortunately, we're not learning color in this class. If you see a bright red image or a soothing blue image, those are going to be very powerful indicators. So we're not going to go over the color things that make up this formula, but we're going to go over a lot of the different things we have talked about in this class so far, like how you use value, the types of shapes you use, and how to manipulate negative space in order to get these different moods we have here. So these are the basic 8. These are not all the moods that exist in the world. These are the ones I see most common in other people's artwork. These are the ones I've used most commonly. And these are the ones also that have kind of some basic formulas that you can use to get these different moods. So what you'll be doing on that on project 3 is basically choosing moods and creating artwork that speaks to a different mood. So let's start here with calm. Okay. Calm mood. Okay. This can also be peaceful, relaxing, soothing, any sort of those sorts of emotions. So now we will list the different sorts of compositional tools that we use to get this sort of mood. So the most important one for this one is large negative space. So you want a very large area of negative space within your composition. Another thing, you want a small focal point. You want horizontal shapes, so shapes that are going side to side. And also rounded shapes. Okay. So again, this isn't math class or science class. So these are all general suggestions. So when you're creating a calm composition, you don't always have to use all of these, but the more you kind of these rules you can use and combine in interesting and creative ways, that will hopefully get you a calming feel for a composition. So let's do a version of this. So it also helps to kind of think about, you know, when you have experienced calm and peaceful emotions yourself, and then think about how to utilize that into a composition. So I think of going to the beach. It's a big horizontal landscape. There's big negative space of the sky. It's big and open. You're physically lying down, usually in a horizontal direction. And these rules, they work for abstract as well as representational. So here's our focal point, very small here. I'm going to just kind of fill this up with horizontal rounded shapes. But I do not want to fill up this area. I can put a few shapes up here, cloud-like shapes. I'm kind of loosely thinking of this as a beach, but I'm also kind of treating it abstract. So it's kind of half and half here. So I do not want to come fill this up. Okay, I want to leave that space empty. So does this composition make you feel a little more calm and relaxed? Good. So, I mean, you can do the same thing with any sort of subject matter. And that's kind of the cool thing about this project is you can draw the same thing like we did with the mountain example. You can draw the same subject matter, but have it portrayed in a calm way. So if I want to draw a city, which is something that we think of as being large and loud and exciting, I want to draw a city in a way that uses some of these things as well. Okay, so I'm going to try and use some horizontal rectangles. Maybe we'll have one building here be the focal point. Have that one come up into the negative space. Okay, so it's the same idea here. I'm kind of going through, okay, good. Large negative space. My focal point is small. I have some horizontal shapes. It's kind of hard because it's buildings, but that's okay. And rounded shapes. I don't have a lot of rounded shapes, so I'll try and get some like really rounded, smooth clouds in here. Maybe put some rounded shapes on top of these buildings as well. Okay, so for this whole project, it's not what you're drawing, but how you draw it. How do you draw something to make it appear calm or to appear some of the other moods? Okay, so any questions on calm? So some of you guys started to do this on project 2, which is good. The one I just looked at, I even mentioned on some people's projects, oh, there's a good sense of mood here, or there's a sense of motion in this, or this one feels really calm. So you can start to look back at work you've done before and be like, oh, this kind of has a calm mood to it or whatever. Okay, so that's calm. Let's see which one we got next. Let's go for action. Action is kind of good because it's has a lot of things that are opposite of calm. So action, movement, anything dynamic. So you'll see these sorts of compositions used a lot in comic books. You'll see them during action scenes in a movie. Yeah, those are kind of some of the main places you'll see these sorts of compositions. You'll see it in photography too, when they want to get a sense of motion in photography, even though it's a still image. So the most important one for this one, for anything with action, is diagonals. And we will talk, I'll mention the Dutch tilt. Okay, so diagonals are the big one for this. You want small negative space? And angular shapes. Yeah, that's good for now. Yeah, okay. So let's start with the composition here. So let's say I'm working on a poster and they want to show a car driving really, really fast. Okay, so they want to show a car driving, show how fast this car is, how cool it can look. If I just come here and draw a car like this, even if I put some like lines like this, does this show how fast this car is moving? In this drawing right here. Yeah, not really. There's some motion there. Yeah, But I want to think about how can I make this car feel like it's moving super fast. When someone looks at this image, I want them to just feel the motion of this car. Well, let's go back to our little list here and look at what we can start with. Diagonals, that's our most important one. So usually when I draw in an action composition, I like to start with a big diagonal right across the page. So the way they do that with film or with photography is they will literally take the camera and tilt it to the side a little bit. So that's a Dutch tilt. I think I have a couple of photograph examples of that later on. So look for the next time you're watching an action scene of a movie, or maybe some sort of photograph of something going fast, or from a video game. See if you can see that Dutch tilt that people use. Okay, now let's think of angular shape. So this car I drew here is all rounded. So let's just make a more angular shaped car. So you'll notice a lot of car designs already, the fast looking cars already have an angular design to the look of the car. Lamborghinis, sports cars, things like that. I don't know what kind of car this is. Cars are hard to draw. I'm doing my best here. Okay, so we got a car. So already we got more sense of motion there. We have some diagonal shapes. The car is drawn angular. Yeah, I can make it into a pure silhouette. You don't always have to, but I'll just put some more solid black on this car to make sure it really stands out. Some of you guys had really good use of black in your projects, and usually I mention that if I saw really good use of black, but black can be and then some people didn't have enough black or dark values. So make sure you always have a good amount of dark or black value in there. Then I'll just add some background, some like buildings in here, have it going through a city. And I want all these buildings to be on a diagonal as well. Kind of draw those with some angular shapes. And I'm going to fill this up so it becomes, so there's not as much negative space. We got a little negative space here. I could just do this whole ground plane black too. That might make it more interesting as well. can put the line in the road there. All right, so there is kind of a representational version of it. And again, you can do the same thing with abstract as well. You just start with diagonal, use angular shapes. Focal point shape that is angular as well. Work in some diagonals for leading lines and stuff like that. So even though this is abstract, it still kind of has that feeling of action and incitement and movement going on. But it's using all the same stuff there. So these are kind of like formulas, you know, of how to get these different, convey these different emotions, but it's just up to see how you creatively use these different formulas. So these ones are better. Any questions on action? Okay. So that was calm and action. Which one do we have next? Okay, strong. Strong, power, powerful. Anything, those sorts of feelings or emotions. So for this one, the biggest thing is small negative space. And it goes hand in hand with this, but a large focal point. And also rectangular shapes. Or square. So when you think of a square or a rectangle, generally those shapes feel very solid and strong and hard to move. Whereas if you had a shape like this shape feels like it's about to tip over. Even more so if it was at an angle like this. Okay. So this one is going to feel strong and stable like that, where this one feels like it has a sense of movement. Okay. I'll see this. Oh, and another good one for this, symmetrical composition. So just putting something right there in the middle of the composition and building around it symmetrically. So I see this one with like, in, you know, different, you know, movie posters and things like that. If you have the very strong character and you want to show that a character is very strong, oh yeah, and then also use of black. Use of 100% black. Black is a very bold and strong value. It stands out, so it goes well with this. So we got a big, strong, large focal point here, and I'm just going to fill this background up, the little bit of negative space there is, with 100% black. Okay. So I kind of tried to draw that person with more angular, rectangular features. You remember how we drew the, where did it go? The city here for the calm one. Let's say we wanted to show that building, and rather than making it feel calm, we wanted to make it feel strong. So how should I do that? Okay, we want a large focal point. We want to really show the rectangular shape of this thing. Sometimes having it not even fit in the composition, so having your focal point go like outside of the composition. Want to use some solid black, so we'll fill this in with a lot of black on it. Maybe put some other buildings behind it. Put in some clouds as well, but I might even want to make this a little tighter so we have smaller, even smaller negative space around the building. I can continue to push this and make this even bigger and hopefully stronger here. Okay, any questions for that strong or powerful? So I'll have a drawing challenge for you guys this week. Like I said, I think I'll send it around tomorrow or later today. But it's basically going to be drawing one subject matter in multiple different moods. So how I draw the building to feel calm, how I drew the building to feel strong and powerful, that is basically what you will do. Okay, let's see. Let's get one more today. Let's do size. So this is basically anytime you want to make something feel large or you want to make something feel small. Okay. So some of you guys did this in your previous project, which is cool. You're going to use a sense of scale. Okay. And you're going to use size contrast. Okay. So that's basically, so size contrast is just contrasting the size of your focal point with other objects around it. So let's say I had a little shape like a little rectangle shape. Now I wanted to make this rectangle, which can be my focal point. I want to make this rectangle feel very small. What should I do? I'll just surround it with bigger rectangles. Now we got all these big rectangles here. That little rectangle will feel even smaller now because it's surrounded by big rectangles. So it's the focal point here because it's a dark value, but it's also the focal point because it is using size contrast to show that that thing is smaller and different than everything else in this composition. And you do the opposite to make something feel large. Well, let's do a vertical frame here. So we can have a nice portrait of a tree. Let's say I wanted this tree to feel like the biggest tree in the forest. I want to make it feel huge. How should I do that? How should I get across that feeling of this is a super large, extra large tree? Well, just surround it with smaller trees. So now that one large tree really stands out using size contrast to make it feel large. All right. Has anyone ever heard of using scale before in artwork or imagery? Kind of. Okay. So using scale is just using the size of something that we know to compare it to the size of something else. Lots of times a person is used. So you may see in like these diagrams, we have like a dinosaur or something. And you want to know how big is this dinosaur compared to a person? Well, they put a little silhouette of a person there to explain how big that dinosaur is. So that's just using scale because we know the person, average person, about 5 or 6 feet tall. So that compared to the dinosaur, so then we got 5, 10, you know, the dinosaur is over 10 feet tall. So it's basically just using that within some imagery that we can come up with. So you'll see it a lot in like fantasy stuff or, you know, stuff with like monsters that there needs to be a sense of scale in there to explain to the viewer how big this thing is. So here we go. This is a sea monster creature type thing underwater. We have no idea how big this is. So this thing could be big, it could be small. If I come in and put a human face right here, I guess you need some goggles because it's underwater. Then we know that's a small creature. You know, it's only a few feet tall or long. Uh-oh. What just happened? What just happened? You guys there? Can you still hear me? Okay, cool. Something happened with my screen for a second. Okay, good to go. All right, so yeah, if you are, if you want to know how big this guy is, all you have to do, if we want to make this into a giant creature, then we just put a person down here. Put them underwater, give them some flippers and a scuba tank. And that now becomes a giant sea monster because we got a 5 to 6 foot person. Now we know, compare this guy compared to the monster, that monster is huge, okay? So you can play with that in a lot of different ways. It's basically just putting something really big next to something really small and using those two things to compare the size to one another. So we can look at that. We'll look at some examples here in a sec, but we'll just go over these 4 today, and then we'll do the next 4 next class. But it is kind of interesting that, I mean, there are just these basic formulas you can use, but then it's on you to be creative within these formulas. So and think about how you're going to use those in unique, interesting, different ways. Any questions on any of these different moods we've gone over today? You guys write down the compositional elements of each one. Okay. Oh yeah, good question, Zach. Yeah, lots of times there will be a combination of these. It's rarely just one or the other. So you'll find sometimes it could be one mood or the other. For like when we get into doing the project, I'll have you guys focus on one main mood. So maybe you're creating a composition with speed in it, but then maybe also have some scary or horror elements to it as well. Okay, so that's okay if these moods will always kind of get combined in different ways. Like I said, it's not math class or science class. These are all kind of, they can flow and blend together in different ways. Good question. So for the project 3 and the drawing challenge next week, like your guys' goal is going to be to create really clear moods. So you don't want to have it be, you want to be very clear to the viewer. You don't want to have someone kind of wonder what it is. You want to kind of hit them over the head with it to make it super clear to the viewer. And that's going to kind of be your guys' goal. All right, I'm going to open up some images here unless there's any other questions before I move on. And I'm going to see if you guys can tell what sort of mood the artist is trying to portray here. Okay, so what sort of mood do you guys think this image is? This is by the artist Humberto Ramos. This is an image for a Spider-Man cover. Yes, action, Zach, exactly. Action dynamic, yep. So what's giving away that this is action or dynamic? Yes, the diagonals. So this entire composition is built on diagonals. So first, if we just look at the shape of this focal point, and kind of simplify Spider-Man here to an abstract shape. This is a very angular shape, but also a very diagonal shape. Yeah, there's almost no negative space here in this composition. So you got a very diagonal, very angular focal point shape. And then the whole background is on a diagonal as well. So there's almost no negative space here. Exactly, Regan. Yeah, so if this was a photograph or from a movie, this would be a Dutch tilt with the camera. Since this is just a drawing, the artist drew it on a diagonal. So there's nothing straight up and down or straight horizontal. Everything is on a diagonal in this composition. Let's look at a couple other motion or action ones. Here we go again, another kind of Dutch tilt here. So the whole car is on a diagonal. The whole pose of the dinosaur is on a diagonal. And then we get all these speed lines too. Those are just a whole bunch of diagonals thrown in. And we lose, I mean, there is some negative space here around the dinosaur, but they filled up that negative space with speed lines there. So another interesting example. Here's a photograph example. So this is a photograph. I'm not sure what city this is in, but it's a downtown city street. So you can see this is a photograph. They're physically tilting the camera. And that creates all these diagonal lines along this bus. All the lines of the buildings are on a diagonal. So this is a photograph version of that same effect. Here's just one more So I like this one too, because this is pretty much an everyday scene. So it's just a person crossing the sidewalk or crossing the street. But the whole city is put on a tilt and the pose of the character is on a diagonal as well. So this one is a little bit more subtle than, say, this one. This one is really over the top with motion. This one's a little more subtle. This one has some more negative space in there. So putting that focal point in the negative space. So all of these artists, photographers, and illustrators are creating the that sense of motion, but in slightly different ways, with different mediums, with different subject matters, with different stories going on here. Okay, let's do another one. Okay, let's see if you guys can tell the mood of this one. How about this one here? What mood would you guys say this one is? Calm, exactly. Calm, peaceful. What's showing that this is calm? Yep. So small focal points, exactly. So this is our primary focal point for this one. Like, look how small this shape is. So I mentioned it when some of you guys made, it's kind of, people tend to kind of naturally make their focal points larger because they think that makes it more important. So on some of you guys' project, I commented, oh, nice job with a small focal point. So a small focal point shape here. This person would be a secondary focal point over here. But yeah, look at all this negative space. So this whole water is negative space here, and this whole sky is negative space. So it's all empty. So there is a little bit of stuff over here. So some busyness along there. But when you look at this, probably 2/3 of that composition is just empty space. And then this is the only space filled with stuff right in here. But the rest of it is just empty. Okay, let's look at a couple other calm ones here. This one I really like. I think it's interesting with the vertical format of the frame, because I mentioned a lot of time horizontal has that common feel, but this vertical format did it. And I also like how they put the negative space, the water becomes the negative space there. So they could have put like waves and different textures and stuff in the water, but sometimes you don't need that. And sometimes it would be too much to have that. So putting the focal point in the big empty space of the water right there in the middle of the composition. And then horizontal shape, horizontal, horizontal, all up and down there. But if you want to do a calm one, just remember that negative space is the #1 way to do that. Small little focal point here, negative space, negative space. Same idea here. Okay, let's look at a couple other ones. Okay, how about this one? What mood would you say is here? Yes, strong. So as you can see, they're matching these moods, strong, powerful, exactly, to the story or to the character. So the Spider-Man, you know, he's a character all about movement and swinging and jumping all the time. So they used, they got a sense of motion in that cover. For this cover, it's all about Hulk, one of the strongest, powerful characters. So they create a different sort of composition for that character than for the other one. Here's another one, symmetrical composition of Batman, heavy use of blacks, a big, large focal point in there will feel strong and imposing. Here's a photograph of Mount Rainier, so kind of a photograph version of the example I was doing earlier, but just choosing to photograph this mountain in a way that makes it take up the entire composition, takes up a lot of the, just a little bit of negative space around there. Okay. And which other one did we do today? Oh, size. Let's look at a couple size ones. So here's a sense of size and a sense of scale. So look how big these trees are. So what shows you how big these trees are in this image? Exactly, this little guy here. So little person, giant tree stump, and then that makes you know how big the rest of these trees are. So using size contrast, one little shape by all these big shapes, having a person we know the size of next to the size of this stump lets us know how massive these trees are. But you'll see this in a lot of artwork. So giant dragon here. I showed you some Eyvind Earle illustrations before. So little person, big dragon there to get that sense of scale. This is it, concept art from Zootopia. But same idea, small characters surrounded by big characters there. Small shapes surrounded by big shapes. The small guys will feel smaller because they're surrounded by big shapes. Okay, so that is about it for today. So make sure you have a good understanding of those moods, the drawing challenge that I'll be doing next week. I'll have you guys illustrate some different moods with a similar subject matter, but I'll send out directions for that later today or tomorrow. And there will also be a few new YouTube videos for you guys to watch, some tutorials. I'm just going to be introducing a few new tools for you guys over the next couple weeks. But yeah, that's it. Let me know if there's any questions about project 2 or anything like that. But other than that, I will see you guys in a week.